Says, reflecting on the clips is a waste of John's time, Mark. Let's get to Israel. All right.
Why are you yelling?
First of all, I don't think it was a waste of time because I think a lot of people saw that last night. So I did want to get his take on various things.
No, and I'm happy to give it, and I'm happy to tell you. In the end, this is not a vote between Vance and the governor. It is a vote on whether you want Donald Trump to be president of the United States for the next 4 years. That's what it boils down to, period.
Mark, wish John Rothman a Happy New Year. Yeah, Happy New Year to John Rothman and all of our Jewish boys and girls. But I do want to ask you about Israel, John. Yeah. And first we got a comment on Israel. Let me just, before I get Israel got attacked by Iran, and it says from Joe Johns, and the Middle East is on fire. Dick Cheney supports Kamala. That's all we need to know. This is an anti-Dick Cheney. I see. Democrats wake up to the fact that Kamala has said she will appoint Republicans and Dick Cheney came out to endorse her. What role will Dick Cheney play in the Kamala White House? That's ridiculous. Let me tell you, none.
But
exactly.
Wait, Liz Cheney might play a role because she is viewed as a constructive person, and she is campaigning now for Harris. So
she's viewed as a constructive person, but let's face it, John, her politics do not align with the Democratic Party. She would be for the SCOTUS appointments do conform with the kind of general philosophy that she has.
I don't disagree with you on that, but I'm saying Kamala Harris is going to put Republicans in positions where she can work with them. Right. And Elizabeth Cheney might be somebody who she could find a spot for, which would be useful. Let me remind you that when Franklin Roosevelt was president, no more partisan Democrat, he put Stimson and Knox in his cabinet just before the 1940 election. Let me point out to you that all of our recent presidents, Democratic presidents, have included Republicans. Senator Cohen was made Secretary of Defense. These sorts of things happen. But anyway, you want to move to Israel? Let's do it.
Now we move to Israel. It's a tough neighborhood, as is often said, and wow, now the toughness of the neighbors really comes to pass. And in a week's time, all of a sudden you have not only the Gaza conflict, but a real engagement with Hezbollah. And Hezbollah, as I've said before on the show, essentially runs Lebanon. And you even have involvement from the Houthis. So you've got Yemen involved. And that's to leave out the biggest player and the one that funds all of them and supports all of them, Iran. So how to handle this situation, both if you're Israel and the U.S. and the world.
Okay, let's point out yesterday, 181 missiles, ballistic missiles, were fired at Israel. Let's point out that because of the alliance between the United States and Israel, those missiles did limited damage. A couple of them hit, but no substantial damage. The real question was answered by Joe Biden this morning. He made clear that the United States is not in favor of Israel hitting the nuclear sites, which Iran has. My answer is the Israelis won't care. The Israelis understand very clearly that if Iran ever had a nuclear weapon or were able to use a nuclear device, they would be toast. So the Israelis are not fooling around here, and the world needs to understand it. So my expectation is there will be, and President Biden said it this morning, a heavy hit by Israel on Iran. How they calibrate that hit, whether it includes the nuclear facilities, oil facilities, whatever it may be, that's what's going to be critical. But I can tell our listeners this. Israel will not roll over and play dead. And no Israeli prime minister, whether it left or right, doesn't matter, will allow Iran to have a nuclear weapon, pure and simple. So these are real issues. And let me point out, nobody talked last night about Ukraine, which is an equally explosive situation, because the largest nuclear plant in Europe is located in the Ukraine. And will there be a battle in terms of that? So we have a lot of issues. And let me also quickly point out that Trump and Vance are discouraging the idea that if they win the election, they'll give aid to Ukraine. And I point this out because that would be a complete repudiation of who we are as a nation. Let me also point out there are a lot of Ukrainians and Eastern Europeans who live in Ohio, in Michigan, in Wisconsin. They are very much aware of this. That's a big deficit in terms of votes for Donald Trump, I believe. Let me say in terms of the Middle East, Democrats and Republicans agree Israel has to be supported, backed to defend itself. Doesn't matter whether it's Joe Biden or Donald Trump. Israel will receive the support that it wants. But let me give you one other indication. The Israelis are not, I want to underline this repeatedly, are not going to do anything that they view is not in their national interest. And that means the Iranians should be on the alert, because the Israelis are not going to sit back and wait for Iran to have a nuclear weapon. And it's pure and simple. The fact is that Israeli intelligence in Lebanon worked brilliantly. First, it was the pagers, then it was the walkie-talkies, then it was to go after the leadership of Hezbollah. And you need to know, and I don't know if we have a chart of it, but most of the leadership of Nasrallah's group, including Nasrallah himself, have been eliminated. Doesn't mean new people won't come up, but the Israelis have completely disrupted the communications in that situation. And for the Israelis, that's very important.
First, I'd like to mention, if you want charts, you need to bring your own charts to this show. Is that right? Yes, exactly. Now, the second point I'd like to make is...
that means I have to chart my own course?
Exactly. It was...
What?
All right, settle down. Now, what I did want to mention one thing that struck me initially. I know he was off balance right away last night, and it's always easier when you're watching a debate than if you're actually involved in this TV show that they call a debate, and there are jillions of people watching, so much pressure. But the first question was related to Iran, and what the GOP and Trump, and by extension J.D. Vance, is trying to do is tag the Democrats with anything that in the world that's going bad, any war, any conflict, any dispute.
Yes, when Trump was president, peace broke out in the world.
Thank you.
Right?
Thank you. It was, so they don't mention Yemen, they don't mention Syria, they don't, but more to the point, Trump pulled out of the Iran nuclear agreement. And you can argue that Trump Middle East policies destabilized parts of that region. Certainly the Iran relationship was destabilized during the Trump presidency. Again, you can argue the specifics, and I yield to you on this stuff because I think you know all this stuff in such a detailed way. But I just say the pure politics of it, I wouldn't own the fact that somehow the Democrats on their watch have witnessed a destabilization of the Middle East. I think that happened under the Trump administration.
Or the world. Look, Donald Trump says, when I was president, the world was at peace. Well, if he thinks that, I have a bridge I'd like to sell him made out of gold right here in San Francisco. These are non-starters, but the important element for me very clearly is that American support for Israel and American support for Ukraine must be steady and firm. Any other policy will invite disaster. I am confident that Trump and Vance will support Israel, as will President Harris, but I'm equally concerned about Ukraine. And again, I want to reinforce this. Vance has opposed every effort to provide aid to Ukraine. This is a major war. There is a nuclear element to what is happening in Ukraine. People are ignoring it. And I think this is something that everybody needs to understand. Do I have more faith in Harris than I do in Trump when it comes to foreign policy? The answer is, of course. May I make one other comment? I was outraged this week. Outraged when Donald Trump said that Kamala Harris was mentally incapacitated from birth. I listened to that and I thought to myself, and I've studied American politics. You can talk to me about any election, any dispute between candidates. Never in the history of American politics have we heard such a disgraceful statement by a leading American political figure, let alone a former president of the United States. Kamala Harris is not only fully mentally competent, she's able, and the fact is that should have come up last night. Vance should have been asked bluntly, do you believe that Kamala Harris is mentally incapacitated? I would have loved to have heard that response. I think the moderators last night were weak. They did not get to the heart of the matter. They could have done the same thing with Vance that they should have done in a much firmer way, but they could have done the same thing in terms of comments the governor has made, which I think deserve examination. So my answer is, we better be aware that foreign policy is critical. I've told you this before. Richard Nixon once said to me, 70% of a president's time is consumed with foreign policy. And Richard Nixon was right. And the world is on fire. That's the first thing I've agreed with Donald Trump on in a long time, when he said yesterday, the world is on fire. And he's absolutely right.
I want to ask you about double back and ask you about the nuclear stuff. So Randy says nuclear agreement or not, Iran was going to forge ahead and develop a nuclear weapon. I disagree with you, Randy. I mean, maybe over the long haul they would have, but this would have really put them in a box. There's no question that nuclear agreement was reviewed by a number of nuclear proliferation concerned agencies, worldwide NGO type agencies that are concerned with this area, and they all felt that nuclear agreement actually might really have a limiting effect on Iran.
Your keyword there is might, because Randy is
exactly.
right. Randy is right in this sense. The Iranians don't give a tinker's damn. They are going to develop their nuclear initiative. They were going to do it anyway. And even when the agreement was in effect, they were still going ahead. And we know that because of the nature of the refining process that they've been using with their nuclear. So,
well, the reality is that moving that fissile material around is not easy, and they were subjected to spot checks. It was BS that there was some kind of 90-day warning before there was going to be an inspection. Those inspections that were stipulated in the agreement actually had teeth. I disagree with you on that. It is naive.
That's right. You can disagree with me, but I'm telling you, as a matter of fact, okay. Iran never abandoned the idea of developing a nuclear weapon.
Yeah, I never abandoned the idea of a democracy, but we don't have it here in this country.
But that's not a proper equation. We have seen what Iran is capable of. We have seen what they have determined to do.
And so you don't want to make any agreement with them that would allow you to go into their country and inspect their nuclear program?
Did I say that?
Well, then what are you saying?
I didn't say that. You said that. I'm saying that the checks on Iran, on its nuclear development, were vague, were not exactly in line. And if you go back and you look at the record, you'll see the UN Nuclear Agency, in fact, when the agreement was still in force, was critical of Iran for doing things that were outside of the realm of that agreement.
Oh, I'm only saying to you, just as Russia has done things outside the realm of agreements.
But we're not talking about Russia.
We're talking about historically countries that we have agreements with oftentimes do things outside the realm of the agreement.
I did a course, Mark, on agreements that have been broken in the 20th century. I can get down a list of all of the agreements with you that have been broken in the 20th century. I'm only suggesting to you, Russia has a certain ability, even though I disagree with their policy, they're careful to a degree. The Iranian government is not. The Iranian government is ruled by religious fanatics. And their intent, and they make it clear, the Grand Ayatollah says it repeatedly, is the destruction of Israel. And by the way,
John, but by pulling out of the agreement, now you have no ability as
I was not in favor of pulling out of the agreement.
Okay, well then
I was not in favor of pulling out of the agreement. But on the other hand, I would not have voted for the agreement either. But I wasn't in favor of pulling out. But it goes to show you the power of a president of the United States. Make no mistake, who is president matters. By the way, that did not come up last night. Somebody should have said, were you in favor of withdrawing from the agreement?
Exactly my point. This is precisely the point. Thank you. Bringing it back around, because I felt as though that was an opportunity at the beginning of the debate. They started with Iran. And I think that, again, he was off balance a bit, but I would have liked to have seen him work that.
You know something? The moderators, in my judgment, did a mediocre job. They did not pursue the questions. They did not hit them the way the questions ought to have been hit. But that's the way we structure these debates. Not debates, joint appearances. We don't want that kind of confrontation. And so the reason why everybody felt good, because things were going so well and they seemed to agree on so many things when they really didn't.
Right. There was, I think that's true. Geniality somehow varnished over the true dangers. Mark's
it fosters this conciliatory sense. By the way, you were right, Mark, 100% when you asked, why wasn't the Project 2025 issue raised more effectively? And Senator Vance has been completely in favor of that. That should have been, that had been discussed and repeated over and over again, and it wasn't. There are a lot of things that I felt in the so-called debate were very inadequate. But bottom line, and I think I want to come back to that before we conclude, it doesn't matter. We don't vote for a vice president. The last time a vice president mattered was Lyndon Johnson in 1960. And that was because Johnson delivered Texas to Kennedy. That is where a vice president matters. So it'll be interesting.
And I'm just going to, and I've heard this before, and I don't think that that is in dispute, but I'd like to have one little codicil to this, and that is the following. I think in this environment, given this media noise, the moment during which you have two high-profile figures, political figures, again, they're running for vice president, doesn't really matter, all the reasons that you just mentioned, it is an opportunity to bring forward certain issues and make the American public aware of certain issues in a way that cuts through that noise. So the moment that that TV show appearance, et cetera, we both agree it's not a real debate, exists, allows certain points to be made that, should they cut through the noise, could be very, very important, and maybe even determinative.
Vance didn't want to tell the things that he felt.
Of course not.
You alluded to that earlier. So it's less relevant. There is only one question on the ballot that matters to me in the presidential election. Do you want Donald Trump back in the White House for 4 more years? Do you trust his leadership? And I think the answer from the American people, I really believe this, will be no. Now, somebody will ask me, and they should ask, do you have full faith and confidence in Kamala Harris? Look, I've known her for many years. I think she'll do a fine job. But here's the question for you. If Harry Truman in 1944, vice president of the United States, people laughed. They used to say to err is Truman, or the senator from Pendergast, who was the political boss in Missouri who put him into the Senate in the first place. We don't know how a vice president is going to perform until they're president. And so I only would respectfully say, right now it's a choice between 2 ideologies. And one of your commentators earlier, one of the people who offered a comment in the chat, said it is almost certain that Vance will be president of the United States if they win the election. My answer to that is, whether Trump lives or dies, the odds of an incumbent vice president being nominated for the presidency of the United States, if they want the nomination, an incumbent vice president, 100%. We don't deny incumbent vice presidents the opportunity to win a nomination, and I can give you historical data on that. And so the question is, do you want Vance to be president of the United States? And I come back to the most shocking thing to me, and it is appalling to me, that to accuse Kamala Harris of being mentally incompetent is absolutely one of the most disgusting things. And the other thing is, nobody asked a blunt question. Did Haitians eat cats and dogs? That was Senator Vance's theoretical position. Not theoretical, it was practical. And so maybe it's because the difference between moderating a debate and being a radio talk show host is very clear, Mark. If we had been asking the questions, they would have been a lot tougher. And may I also point out, it is 2 years this week since they pulled the plug on KGO. And I only point that out because I want people to remember that we do not have in Northern California, aside from the Mark Thompson program, we don't have a forum, and there is no radio program that allows us to address these issues. I just wanted to point that out because when you mark an anniversary, you should remember.
No, it's true. And you're right. It's coming up on our 2-year anniversary.
You know what I wore today?
For just that
you
reason.
Can't see it, but I wore my KGO. Let me see if I can get it in. Yep, there it is.
Oh, there you go.
I purposely wore my KGO insignia because, well, you know, Mark, people come up to me and say, didn't you used to be John Rothman? But fortunately, ladies and gentlemen, we don't have to ask, didn't you used to be Mark Thompson? Because we can tune in and support the Mark Thompson program every single day.
Yeah, I thank you for all the people, and there are a bunch of them that have already stepped up and supported our show and allow us to continue. So that's really great, and we love.
I'm not asking for a raise, Mark. I'm really not.
That's good because we don't have anything to give you, but we do. But we do give you the love, and I love running around the schoolyard with you on stuff, even though we generally agree on things. So it's so much fun.
Watch the Middle East this week. I'm telling you, when we meet again next week, watch the Middle East and what's going to happen. It could be highly dramatic, very important, and a powerful discussion point. And may I wish you as well a very happy, healthy new year. Very important.
John, I do want to mention one thing on the way out, sure. and this is neglected. Iran also has an interest in this not becoming a broader conflict. Am I right?
Yes and no. They don't want to be destroyed They realize that and you should have listened carefully to Benjamin Netanyahu, who made the observation, there is tremendous opposition to the radical government in Iran today. And may I point something out? At the Nixon Library next week, the Shah's son, the would-be Shah, is being honored along with his mother. She won't be there, but he will be. There is still a move in this country, as there was in 1953, to remove an Iranian government. Mossadegh was removed in the Eisenhower administration. And I want to suggest to you that if some forces had their way, the current government of Iran would be replaced. Make no mistake, if the Israelis can reach Nasrallah, they can reach into Iran. So this is something else that everyone has to consider.
But John, when Mossadegh was removed, they didn't have nukes, the Iranians.
No, I'm not talking about nukes. I'm just talking about the maneuver to remove people from power.
Okay, it just
that's the bottom line.
Yeah.
There is an Iranian opposition, by the way, led in large measure not by the Shah's son, but by women who are oppressed, repressed, and deprecated in every way in Iran. So there's so many different components here that's why foreign policy is so interesting. And one day, perhaps, we'll have candidates for president who will really be able to talk foreign policy intelligently. Oh, by the way, can I acknowledge Jimmy Carter's 100th birthday? I think we should. President Carter celebrated his 100th birthday. And I didn't agree with everything that Jimmy Carter did, but to live to be 100 years old and to do everything he's done is quite a remarkable testimony. The oldest living and the oldest, in fact, American president.
Totally agree. Yeah, we were celebrating his 100th birthday with Spencer Christian, who's a good pal of his.
Yes.
Yesterday.
Spencer told you he went down to Plains at the Carter's request to MC an event for them. And it's absolutely fascinating and an important story.
Good stuff. John Rothmann, everybody. Thanks, John.
Happy New Year.
Around the Political World with John Rothmann is his podcast show. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.